The first record of the Ravencroft family disappears as suddenly as it appears. There's a stretch of woodland in southern Devon where the trees bend at unnatural angles. Locals say it's just the wind, or maybe an old storm that twisted the roots when no one was looking. But if you follow a particular gravel path, one that doesn't appear on any recent maps, you'll reach a stone archway covered in moss. Beyond it, buried in overgrowth, is a building that doesn't look ruined so much as erased. Ravencroft Hall. Some call it a mansion. Others, a mausoleum. Its windows are stained with years of rain and silence. Its doors won't open, even when unlocked. And beneath the sagging gables and lichen-covered slate, a name is still faintly etched into the stone above the entrance. Ravencroft, the last of the old blood. For over 3 centuries, this family lived here, often in near-total seclusion. They were once nobility, minor in title but major in wealth. But what made them infamous wasn't their status or their estate. It was the way they disappeared, not just the people, the story. You see, no Ravencroft was ever confirmed dead. Not by certificate, obituary, nor eyewitness. When they were gone, they were simply gone. Sometimes a closed door. Sometimes a locked room. Sometimes just a dinner plate left on the table, still warm. The family called it passing inward, though what that meant was never fully explained. And for most people, it never needed to be. The Ravencrofts were best left alone, but some didn't listen. In 1984, 2 students from Exeter University attempted to explore the grounds. Their names were Thomas Reeves and Esther Klein. They had read about the manor in a crumbling town archive, where a librarian warned them not to touch the silence. What she meant by that, they couldn't say. But the 2 went anyway. They never made it past the gate. Their journal, which was found near the tree line weeks later, included detailed notes about the trip. But the final pages were incoherent. The handwriting slanted sharply, almost like it was written by a different hand entirely. One line stood out. It was repeated over and over, filling the margins, even wrapping around the cover's inside flap. It already knew our names. That's the thing about the Ravencroft legend. It doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It waits, and somehow, it always seems to be one step ahead of those trying to uncover it. There are photographs of the family, but none of them feel right. Eyes that are too aware. Postures that seem staged, but not for the camera, more like they were bracing for something behind it. In one particular image dated 1872, the eldest daughter, Honora, stands alone by the garden hedge. Her expression is blank, her hands clasped. But in the glass behind her, reflected in the 3rd-story window, there is a silhouette, tall, still, and wearing the same dress. Some say it was a trick of the light. Others say it was the beginning. The Ravencrofts had a way of drawing things toward them. Not crowds, never crowds, but attention of a different kind. Mice would nest in the cellar, only to die facing the same direction. Birds would land on the same branch near the nursery window every year on the same day. And even the weather would behave. Oddly, rain that never reached the ground. Snow that melted in concentric circles. The local priest once referred to the family as the blessed and burdened. He was later dismissed from his parish after a sermon where he claimed the Ravencrofts dreamed in borrowed time. His final entry in the church ledger simply read, "They don't need heaven, they built something else." What that something else was no one knows. But records, scattered, fragmented, and often contradictory, suggest the family was deeply involved in metaphysical study. Not occult in the Hollywood sense, but older, quieter. They didn't hold seances, they documented echoes. They didn't worship entities, they observed patterns. And they didn't fear death, because they claimed to have bypassed it. One account from a former groundskeeper, Harold Mason, describes overhearing the family refer to the folding. According to him, they believed that time, under certain conditions, could be turned like a page, not forward, but inward. He left his post after less than a year, stating in his resignation letter, "The children whisper in languages I don't recognize. I haven't seen their mother in weeks. Only her shadow." Years later, he took his own life. His suicide note contained only one word: mirror. So we ask again, who were the Ravencrofts? A family touched by madness? A lineage of philosophers who wandered too far into forbidden thought? Or something else entirely? A bloodline no longer fully human, shaped by generations of rituals, silence, and watching? And why has the story remained so deliberately incomplete? The land remains untouched. Developers refuse to build there. Every attempt to restore the manor ends abruptly, halted by accident, illness, or inexplicable loss of funding. The structure itself resists renovation. Paint won't adhere. Wood won't take new nails. Even drone footage loses signal near. The West Wing, as if something within the walls, cancels the present moment. Some say the house is still occupied. That if you listen closely near the broken fountain at midnight, you can hear a piano playing inside. The same 3 notes, over and over. A lullaby, perhaps, or a warning. What we know for certain is this: the Ravencrofts were real, their estate was real, and their absence feels intentional. Not like a family that vanished. Like a family that withdrew. As if death was never the ending they planned for. And as you step away from the overgrown path, even in broad daylight, it's hard to shake the feeling that something just beyond the tree line is still watching, still remembering, and still waiting for its name to be spoken again. Perhaps that's why the town stopped saying it, but the stones still carry it. Ravencroft. And the silence beneath that name is still growing. The origins of the Ravencroft family trace back to a time when England's nobility held power not just through land and title, but through secrecy. The first verifiable record appears in 1619, a deed of purchase for a stretch of wooded land in Devonshire, signed by Sir Elric Ravencroft, a newly named baronet under the reign of King James I. It is noted in the margin of that document, in faded ink, that the previous owner of the land had perished in a fire described as of unnatural rapidity. No bodies were recovered. No inheritance was claimed. Elric was already an anomaly. Though granted noble status, he rarely appeared. At court, he held no military rank, made no political alliances, and funded no public works. Instead, he disappeared into the countryside, taking with him only a small retinue of staff and a collection of over 200 books, many of which were banned from circulation by the Anglican Church. Titles whispered in the margins of history: the Ars Tenebrarum, fragments of the Quiet Gospel, the Red Lexicon. Construction of Ravencroft Hall began shortly thereafter. It took 6 years to complete, though no architect was ever credited. According to local rumors, the foundation was laid not in stone, but in salt and ash, an old ritual practice believed to keep something out. Or, perhaps more disturbingly, to keep something in. The building's design defied convention. Rooms were positioned to reflect solstice patterns. Hallways turned at angles not aligned to any known blueprints. Mirrors were placed in strange pairs, always facing doorways but never each other. And beneath the manor, it's believed a subterranean vault was carved, not for wine or storage, but for observation. No floor plans survive, but writings from a 1702 parish clerk suggest a chamber that hears but does not echo. As the family line grew, so did its reputation. Not through scandal, but through absence. The Ravencrofts rarely engaged in public affairs. Their children were educated privately. Their servants rotated frequently, often staying only weeks at a time. When questioned, they described an oppressive quiet in the halls and a strange custom enforced by the family: no mention of death. Servants were not to speak of illness, funerals, or even aging in the household. It was said that to utter such things would bring misalignment. Asterisk in place of religion, the Ravencrofts followed something they called the inner folding, a belief system that rejected linear time. Diaries from 18th century members reference a sacred practice called inversion, during which members would spend hours walking the halls backwards or reciting memories in reverse order. It was not performance. It was preparation. Asterisk, they believed. That time was not a line but a spiral, and that the soul could retreat inward if guided properly. While Christianity taught that death was the gate to eternity, the Ravencrofts believed that death was simply noise, a distraction that could be ignored with sufficient stillness. It's here that the family began to split from human convention. Generations went undocumented by traditional means. Parish registers list births, never deaths. Tax documents show the estate changing hands, but only within the bloodline, and always with a signature matching a name already declared deceased. Even legal experts today cannot confirm when, or if, the title of the estate ever truly transferred, and yet, one thing remained constant: the spiral symbol, carved into wood beams, embroidered into clothing, and scrawled in charcoal along the edges of personal journals. The spiral, always counterclockwise, came to define the family's identity. To them, it was not a shape, it was a map, one that led inward through thought, memory, and breath, until the body no longer needed to be present. A recovered letter from 1824, addressed from Cecily Ravencroft to her cousin in Florence, reads, "The house hums louder now. I believe we are near." Elric said the first fold happens not with light, but with forgetting. He was right. I have forgotten my voice in the mirror, and yet I still speak. If this was madness, it was methodical. Generation after generation continued the practice. They did not seek immortality in the way others did, through preservation or medicine. Instead, they sought detachment, a slow, ritualistic vanishing. Not from the world, but from its structure. No Ravencroft was ever known to die in public. No headstones bear their names. Only one family tomb exists, and it stands empty, the inscription weathered away by time and rain. All that remains is a plaque nailed to its side with a single word etched in Latin: Redditus, translation, return. By the late 19th century, the Ravencrofts had almost completely vanished from public record. Their estate grew quiet. No staff remained. Letters stopped, and the family's name faded into whispered warnings, passed down by locals who refused to walk past the manor's gates. But for a lineage so obsessed with avoiding the end, one can't help but ask, did they succeed? Or did something older claim them first? Whatever the answer, it began here, with a man who built a home not for living, but for leaving. And a family who, for reasons still unclear, refused to let death be the final chapter. Asterisk, the decline of the Ravencroft family wasn't a collapse, it was a slow unraveling, a disappearance by degrees. No scandal ever broke, no final letter was sent. But when you follow the fragments they left behind, a pattern begins to emerge, one that grows darker with each generation. The first recorded event of note occurred in 1674, when Elric Ravencroft's second wife, Miriam, vanished within the estate grounds. According to the housekeeper's journal, the only surviving document from that period, Miriam had been walking the upper gardens during the lunar eclipse. She never returned. Her shoes were found beside the reflecting pool, placed carefully, toe-to-toe, facing the forest. A strange symbol had been scratched into the stone railing nearby, a spiral, drawn in reverse. No search party was sent. No obituary was printed. Her name was never spoken again in the household, not even by the children. The next significant incident came almost a century later. In 1763, a visiting scholar from London named Julian Hartright was staying at Ravencroft Hall to study their private library. In a letter to his university, he describes his fascination with a sealed tome titled The Second Silence. He claimed it contained diagrams of altered vocal cords, instructions for muting breath during sleep, and repeated references to a practice called internal descent. Julian's final correspondence ends abruptly with a single line, "I hear." Then pacing beneath the floor, "I believe I've read too far." He was never seen again. The estate returned his belongings to his brother, except the notebook. That, they said, had already been reclaimed. Fast forward to 1832. This is the year several members of the local clergy accused the Ravencrofts of interference with funerary order. One priest claimed he was asked to perform a christening for a child who had already been baptized 40 years prior. The request came from an elderly woman named Honora Ravencroft, who insisted the infant was her younger self returned. The priest refused. Days later, the chapel's bell tower collapsed during a thunderstorm. No one was inside, but several villagers claimed they heard a baby crying from within the rubble, even though no child was found. Honora herself vanished shortly thereafter. The gatekeeper swore he saw her walking barefoot across the orchard, humming to herself in a language he didn't understand. Her footprints, preserved in mud, ended at a patch of grass near the east wall. No further traces were found. In 1870, Ravencroft Hall hosted its final known gathering, a solstice ceremony witnessed by an invited doctor, Elias Brandt. In his report, he wrote of mirrored rooms arranged in concentric circles, each lit by a single black candle. The guests, all members of the Ravencroft lineage, sat silently, facing inward, eyes closed. At midnight, the central room went dark, and the house emitted what Brandt described as a low mechanical hum, like breath slowed to machinery. When the lights returned, 2 guests were gone. Their chairs were empty, untouched. No one reacted. No one spoke. The others resumed the ritual. Dr. Brandt left the house immediately, and never returned to Devon. His notes were published posthumously, after his death in an asylum, where he spent his final years drawing doorways on the walls of his cell, none of which opened. By 1901, the Ravencroft family had dwindled to just 3 known residents: Patriarch Alaric, his sister Isolde, and a mute child referred to only as the boy. Neighbors reported seeing the child walking the perimeter of the grounds at dawn, always barefoot, often backwards. He never spoke, but was seen carrying a small hand mirror and a notebook. The last confirmed sighting of any Ravencroft was in 1907. A vicar passing the manor at dusk claimed he saw a figure, tall, thin, standing at the top of the manor's western tower. The figure raised its hand, then turned, walking back into shadow. A light was seen briefly in the window, flickering like a candle. Then nothing. When authorities finally entered the estate in 1921, after years of silence, they found it preserved in a disturbingly static condition. The furniture was dust-covered but unbroken. Tables were set. The hearth was cold, but the ashes were recent. Books lay open on desks mid-sentence. And the western tower was sealed shut, door bolted from within. Even more unsettling, all the clocks had stopped, each one frozen at 3:17, a.m. in the basement. They found a long corridor lined with mirrors, all covered in black cloth. Only one was partially uncovered. Its surface had cracked, not shattered, and the reflection inside was described by one officer as a room not in the house. The investigation concluded nothing. The final report was marked inconclusive, with several sections redacted under orders from an unnamed agency. No bodies were recovered, no will was found, and no living heirs were located. One small note, however, was discovered tucked inside the pages of an untouched journal on Alaric's writing desk. In faded ink, it read, "We are not lost. We are beneath." To this day, the Ravencroft estate remains undisturbed, the gate rusted shut, the house silent. And yet, Strange incidents continue to be reported in the area. Voices heard in the trees, timepieces that stop suddenly, and shadows that move with deliberate patience. The timeline ends in absence, but the pattern? It remains intact. Each generation entered, each one vanished. And always, without a sound. Asterisk, the silence surrounding the Ravencroft family was never absolute, not entirely. From time to time, something would leak out. A rumor whispered in the village pub. A forgotten file recatalogued by a nervous archivist. A traveler who wandered too close and came back with no memory of the night before. The outside world may not have understood what was happening at Ravencroft Hall, but it never stopped wondering. In the early 1920s, following the last official investigation into the estate, public interest began to stir. The Times published a brief article titled, "A State Frozen in Time, the Ravencroft Enigma." It described the manor's untouched interior, the frozen clocks, the rooms set for occupants who had long since vanished. But the article ran only once. The next edition replaced it with a correction notice, stating the story had been pulled due to unverified claims and editorial inconsistency. The author of the piece, a journalist named Samuel Tyne, reportedly resigned from the paper. The same week, he later claimed in a private letter to his sister that he had received a package in the mail, a mirror the size of a coin, and a note that read, "You look too long." After that, something shifted. Rather than draw attention, the Ravencroft story began to repel it. Not in a loud or conspiratorial way, more like an absence that made people uncomfortable. Researchers who attempted to compile a full family history found entire pages missing from public archives. Handwriting would distort near the margins. Names would blur on photocopies, as if deliberately smudged. A historian at the University of Exeter, Dr. Martha Clayton, attempted to write a thesis titled "The Ravencroft Legacy: Between Fact and Folklore." According to her colleagues, her research was meticulous until it wasn't. Whole chapters were deleted overnight. Her notes vanished. She eventually withdrew the paper, claiming she'd come to believe the family's legacy was not a subject, but a structure. Something that rearranges what you know just by looking into it. She now works exclusively with oral histories, refusing to touch archival records. Her office reportedly contains no reflective surfaces. So what exactly did people believe happened? Among locals, the belief is simple: the Ravencrofts made a deal. With what? No one agrees, but the story remains consistent. They were offered a kind of escape from death, a slipping of the soul between the cracks of time, not resurrection, not possession, something older. Some say it was the fold, a space where time loops in on itself until it forgets how to move forward. Others say it was a place beneath memory, a hidden layer of reality that the family accessed through silence, ritual, and the careful erasure of identity. Supernatural theorists have taken it even further. Some point to similarities between the Ravencroft estate and other thin places across Europe, sites where time is said to warp, and individuals report feelings of derealization, repetition, and echoing thought. Theorist and occult writer Lionel Ashcroft wrote in 1989 that Ravencroft Hall may have functioned as an engineered portal, not to another world, but to the absence of one. His theory? The family learned how to step sideways out of linear time and into a kind of psychic corridor, a mirror fold. He called it, where death could not follow because identity no longer held shape. According to Ashcroft, this required decades of preparation, ritual silence, removal of public records, isolation, and the repeated denial of mortality. He argued that the family's most bizarre behaviors, walking backward, erasing birth dates, muting children, were all elements of this inversion process. His critics dismissed it as fiction. Ashcroft died of a stroke in 1992. His final published note read, "Don't trust reflections. They move before we do. Others have offered more grounded explanations. Psychologists suggest the family may have suffered from a hereditary form of shared psychosis, folie, a familial, a generational delusion that spiraled deeper with each passing decade. Their rituals, silence, and obsession with time might have been coping mechanisms taken to a pathological extreme, but even skeptics admit the physical evidence is unsettling. The frozen clocks, the sealed tower, the dustless library. The fact that no official has ever managed to document the manor without error. A BBC documentary team attempted to film a segment in 1974. Their cameras malfunctioned inside the estate. The tapes were blank, not static, not scrambled, just blank. The only surviving footage is a single wide shot of the manor, taken from the tree line. A frame where, if you look closely, a figure appears in the upstairs window, unmoving. Watching. Then, there are the personal stories, harder to verify, but no less chilling. A traveler from Bristol swore that he walked the halls of the Ravenscroft house in a dream, only to wake up with mud on his shoes. A painter who tried to depict the manor found her hands repeatedly drawing spirals until her canvas tore. A child from the nearby village went missing for 3 days in 1998. When she returned, she had aged a year, her baby teeth gone. She said she'd been inside the still house. Authorities dismissed it as trauma-induced confusion. But the locals still don't walk near the estate. Ultimately, every theory ends in the same uncertainty. The facts refuse to settle. The records refuse to stay intact. And the house, always the house, remains untouched by time, waiting behind the trees like a story that no longer wants to be told. Even now, no one has declared the Ravenscroft bloodline officially extinct. And there are those who believe it was never meant to be. Because sometimes, if you pass the gate at dusk and stay very, very still, you'll hear a sound in the windows. Like breathing. Or remembering. Or something trying not to be found. It's difficult to know where to end a story that has no confirmed ending. The Ravenscroft family did not vanish in a single night, nor did they leave behind a final message, a final body, or even a conclusive goodbye. What they left behind was something quieter, a fracture in the narrative, a hole where history should be. And perhaps that's what they intended. Today, Ravenscroft Hall stands as a ruin in name only. Structurally, the manor has endured, its walls unbroken, its roof intact, its windows sealed from within. But it's not just the physical condition that disturbs visitors. It's the way the air feels different the moment you step onto the grounds, a stillness, an absence of birdsong. A feeling like you've stepped not into a place, but out of one. Time behaves strangely here. Watches slow, phones glitch, compasses drift. And there are moments, rare but persistent, when people claim to hear footsteps behind them, even when no one else is there. Or a voice in another room, speaking in a tone too familiar to be forgotten, yet too distant to be real. No official ownership has been established since 1923. Land registries list the property as inactive, though periodic attempts to purchase the estate have all failed. Legal documents go missing. Transactions are reversed. Surveyors report corrupted data, especially near the West Wing. One company, after a full month of study, simply closed the file with a single line: the property does not wish to be sold. There is, of course, no rational basis for such a conclusion. But when so many attempt to record, archive, or map the Ravenscroft story and all fail, it begins to feel less like coincidence and more like resistance. So we are left with what we've always had: fragments, second-hand accounts, discredited reports, whispers, symbols, names written in books that won't stay open. A spiral drawn in soot on the side of a stone chimney. A mirror found cracked in an attic, reflecting not the present moment, but a room that hasn't existed for decades. And then, of course, there's the locket. In 2017, a hiker passing through the forest near Ravenscroft Hall discovered a small silver locket half buried beneath a tree. It was old, but not rusted. Inside, a faded photograph of a young woman, identified later by historical photo analysis as Honora Ravenscroft, the girl who supposedly vanished in the 1830s. The problem? The photo appears to have been taken using photographic techniques. From the early 1900s, over 70 years after her last known appearance. And her face was older, not by much but unmistakably aged. As if she hadn't died. But waited. The locket now rests in a museum in London, though reports claim it often disappears from its case, only to reappear elsewhere in the building. Days later. Whether this is a prank, a malfunction, or something else entirely is unclear. The museum refuses to comment publicly, which brings us back to the question at the heart of it all. What happened to the Ravenscrofts? Some believe they are dead, all of them, and that their legacy is merely the residue of obsession and paranoia. That their vanishing was self-imposed, a family driven into madness by isolation, their rituals the last desperate attempt to assign meaning to decline. Others are not so sure. To those who study what they left behind, the mirrored corridors, the repetitive symbols, the references to time and silence, the suggestion is something far more complex. That the Ravenscrofts were not running from death, but carefully stepping around it. That their disappearance was not erasure, but migration. To where? That's the part no one agrees on. Some call it the inner fold, a term found repeated in multiple journals across different generations. Others refer to the spiral place, a theoretical space outside of memory, where linear time breaks down and consciousness loops inward indefinitely. Whatever it is, it seems to require very specific conditions: isolation, silence, ritual, and forgetting. And if the Ravenscrofts succeeded in reaching this place, if it exists at all, then they may still be there. Not alive, not dead, but present, in some other way. Even now, those who dare to walk near the manor report strange sensations, sudden déjà vu, lost time, the scent of candle wax. Some claim to hear music from the upper floors, an old piano tune, always the same. 3 notes repeating softly in the dusk. You might dismiss it all. You might say it's just the wind or suggestion, or the mind playing tricks in the presence of too much myth. But then again, you might remember the way the mirrors inside the house were all covered. You might ask why. Not because of vanity, not because of superstition, but because some reflections don't reflect the moment you're in. Some reflections remember more than you want them to. The Ravenscroft family may be gone, but in the corners of their estate, in the folds of their journals, in the corridors built at impossible angles, they left something behind. A trace of the impossible. A thread pulled from the edge of reality and woven just deep enough that we can feel the tug, but never find the end. We don't know what waits in Ravenscroft Hall, but we do know this: it never echoes. It never forgets. And it is still listening, even now, especially now, because somewhere, in the mirror of time, the Ravenscrofts might still be waiting for us to look back.